On Life and Meaning is brought to you by Blumenthal Performing Arts, celebrating its 25th year presenting the best in the performing arts, sharing and employing the arts as a major catalyst to strengthen education, building community cohesiveness, and advancing economic growth. Further support is provided by Foundation for the Carolinas, inspiring philanthropy and empowering individuals to create a better community. And by the Arts and Science Council, Charlotte-Mecklenburg's resource hub and lead advocate for the regional cultural community, providing culture for all.
Mark, I've adopted a new mantra, and it's fail faster and just try. And if you fail, try again and just keep trying. And that's how all of this came about. We've really realized there's great traction with the use of VR technology for all these different fields. And so let's be leaders. Let's take risks. We're having to spend money to make money, hopefully, eventually, but it's not about the money. It's about let's change the world. Let's make the world a better place. So I am always open-minded. I've also learned to be flexible, and if there's another path that the universe sets out for me, then I'll go down that path. I just don't sweat the small stuff anymore. As my mom said, if money can fix it, everything will be okay. So I stay focused on what's important, and that's, are my kids okay? Okay, and it's okay if I fail again professionally. I'm proud of that. I'll own it and say, here's what I learned from it.
Paula Kranz is Interim Executive Director of Wheelhouse Media Foundation, a nonprofit arm of Wheelhouse Media, which creates original and branded content across media platforms. Paula is also Director of the Think Broader Foundation. She leads the firm's branding, communications, business, and executive leadership development practices, serving clients across the United States. Paula's experience spans the consulting, media, defense, academic, and nonprofit sectors. Prior to her current work, she was a New York Times bestselling author and research associate at Harvard University Center for Public Leadership. She also served as deputy director of the Fletcher School's Counter-Terrorism Center. Paula is a U.S. Army veteran with leadership experience in the Middle East, Africa, Southeast Asia, and Europe. In this episode, we explore virtual reality immersion, her career in military intelligence, personal drive and ambition, and the mantra that guides her life. I'm Mark Paris, and this is On Life and Meaning. Welcome, Paula.
Hi, thanks, Mark.
Paula, you are a 23-year veteran of the Armed Forces. This Sunday is Veterans Day, and the 100-year anniversary of Armistice Day and the end of World War I. What comes to mind?
Well, first of all, I'm very proud to have served in active duty and in the reserves, and very proud of my brothers and sisters of arms who continue to serve, and I think we need to keep them in our mind as we live very peaceful and happy and blessed lives. There are people still on the front lines in Afghanistan, in the Middle East, and elsewhere fighting for our freedom. For me personally, I also think about how Americans view those who've served in a different light now, and service itself in a different light. So if you look back at the history of service and World War II time period, I think it was 11% of the population served. Vietnam, it was 7%. And more recently, it's less than 0.5% of our population. Now, I'm a silver lining kind of person, so what you can take from that is we do more with less. We have more lethal weapons and more technical equipment that help keep us safe as a country. But on the flip side, there is an increasing civil-military divide. So fewer people serve and fewer families have people who serve, so they can't relate to the sacrifices many of our service members make. The last thing I'll say is that I chose to serve. I'm very proud to serve. So sometimes when somebody says, thank you for your service, I say, no, thank you for letting me serve in this great country for the opportunity.
Paula, there is an art exhibit that you are participating in called Vicarious at the Elder Art Gallery in Charlotte. What is that art exhibit about?
Well, this art exhibit was conceived by Sonia Pfeiffer, the owner of the gallery, and she really wanted to showcase both veterans working in art and stories about veterans by world-acclaimed artists. And our exhibit is a virtual reality immersion empathy experience. And basically, you wear a set of goggles, you sit in a wheelchair, and we put you through a day in the life of a double amputee. So you look down and you have no legs. You are trying to roll through your house in a wheelchair, and you hear this inner voice, which we've recorded, talking about the struggles of rolling over carpet or not being able to get into a bathtub, not being able to leave one's house because there are stairs at both the front and back door and you have no legs. So if there's a fire, the real challenges somebody who's disabled will face. And we wanted to highlight how a veteran organization here in our community, started by veterans who were wounded in Iraq, helps service members who are disabled live with more dignity by renovating their homes. So it's a great, I think, experience that opens one's eyes to the challenges of being disabled.
What would one see experiencing the virtual reality?
Well, it really depends on the particular experience. So the one I just mentioned is a day in the life of a double amputee. We've also produced a virtual reality scenario where an African-American man is being unfairly profiled by the police, and you're sitting in a vehicle. You literally can see 360 degrees around you. You can look above, you can look below. When you look down in this profile scenario, your arms are black, and you see the individual who's doing the acting reach over to the glove compartment, and then a cop pull his weapon out on the window outside, and you have a visceral reaction to it. So one thing I'm fascinated by is the brain science behind this virtual reality. And studies at Stanford, MIT, and other medical universities are showing that from brain scans, from MRIs, that when a person is immersed in this 360-degree environment, their brain is tricked into believing and adopting the subconscious voice of the actor. And it leads to behavior change. And that's exactly what we're pursuing with these initiatives, these immersion videos. So imagine you put on the goggles and you're a homeless disabled person and you're sitting on the street and asking for money, and people walk by and maybe kick you or look the other way, or you can imagine what a homeless person might experience. And when you see that from that perspective and that point of view as a user of the goggles, we hope that your heart and mind is changed to treat them with more respect, or maybe volunteer at a homeless shelter, or find ways to help get people off the streets who really need not a handout, but a hand up.
Paula, when you say we, who is the we?
The we at our team here at Wheelhouse Media, we have a fantastic team of producers, editors, photographers, and just visionaries and creators. And I'm currently serving as the interim executive director of Wheelhouse Foundation. The foundation supports or is supported by Wheelhouse Media, a production company, but their real focus is on code as content. So what does that mean? When you code virtual reality or augmented reality or 3D projection mapping, you can reach an audience in a new and innovative way. So we have a very creative team that have technical backgrounds and everything I just explained. But the real beauty of this team, and part of why I love it so much, is I kind of feel like I'm back in the military. Everybody helps each other out. We have each other's backs. A project needs to get done. I'm going to step up and sweep the floor if I have to, and I'll hold the camera if I have to, and I'll be the producer calling the shots if I have to. And I'm new to this world of media, but everybody has taken a role in helping mentor me, and I bring different assets to the table. So I can give you the names, but check out our website at wheelhousemedia.tv.
Paula, I understand that the VR video that you did for Vicarious was produced in honor of Staff Sergeant Dale Beatty. Who was Sergeant Beatty?
Sergeant Beatty is a National Guardsman who lived in Mooresville, and he and his fellow platoon members, including Specialist John Galena, deployed to Iraq in 2005. And they were out searching for landmines. That was their job. So they happened upon a landmine, unfortunately, and their Humvee was flipped multiple times. Dale lost both of his legs on the scene, and John, one of the also a passenger in the vehicle, was semi-crushed in the vehicle and had a traumatic brain injury, and they both came back with post-traumatic stress. But they came back to our community not feeling sorry for themselves. They came back and saw the challenges of themselves and others who were dealing with their new disabilities in their old life, their old world. So for Dale, who lost both legs, he had the challenge of trying to navigate through his home. If his 2-year-old daughter was crying upstairs, he couldn't crawl up the stairs to respond to her if there was an emergency, and likewise couldn't get out of the home. So they formed a nonprofit called Purple Heart Homes, and they refit homes for service-disabled veterans. And about 2 years ago, Dale and John came to me and asked, well, it's about a year and a half ago, and they asked if we could produce a video that shows the challenges that a disabled veteran faces. And so we started putting the video and the content and the vision together. But unfortunately, Dale passed away in the interim from complications from his double amputations of blood clot. So it just kind of caused me to double down and say, I'm going to get this done, and now we're going to make it to honor Dale's life. So in the video, we have another actor, but we actually reenact the scene in Iraq using real footage from their time in the Humvee right before they drove over the IED. That's at the end of the film, but it's for me, it was important to show, look what these guys endured. Look at the damage done to their vehicle, completely obliterated. They lived through it, and instead of feeling sorry for themselves, they pulled up their bootstraps and have done this great thing in our community. And now they're working across the nation. In fact, they were featured as CNN Heroes of the Year. And so this video tells about their mission, but also honors my dear friend Dale Beatty.
Paula, what are potential uses and benefits of this technology as you think through the opportunities of using VR?
Well, the world is our oyster because anything you dream of, we can do. So we're using it to create empathy. The Smithsonian Institute is trying to create an exhibit that travels around the country to middle schools and teaches kids empathy. It's called Tolerance in Motion. And so if these kids can go into an experience and feel what it's like to be bullied because of their skin color, their religion, their height or weight, we're counting on this research that shows their behavior will change. But beyond the immersion and empathy experience, we're also developing content for training physicians in the ER, for example. It's much less costly than a simulation lab in a hospital. You can use this data that we've produced just like software. You can mass produce it and send it to every medical school around the country. And even more importantly, we feel we can share it with doctors and physicians and medical caretakers in emerging markets in Africa, in India, in Pakistan, so they can have the same quality training that our physicians in America get and save more lives in their community. We're also using virtual reality for just general education. So Discovery Place is one of our clients, and we've created an augmented reality app for dinosaurs. And so there are little things called markers, so a sticker on the wall or a picture or something. You hold your phone up to it and scan it, and all of a sudden a dinosaur will appear through your phone to be in the same room. And you can teach kids about what this dinosaur looked like when it lived, its height and weight, and so forth. You can do that for numbers and letters for preschoolers. You can do that for people learning to do rehab in a hospital. So it might not be educational, but just educational in the context of learning to live with a new normal. Those are just a few examples, but I could go on and on.
Paula, this work that you're doing is under a larger umbrella called Think Broader, cleverly named. What is Think Broader?
Well, Think Broader Foundation has been around about 3 years now, and I co-founded it with another fellow female veteran. She was a Marine Corps combat pilot, and we believed in promoting women's equality, and we were trying at the time to address unconscious bias in the media. And while we started by focusing on gender bias in the media, our mission quickly expanded to address racial bias, just given the uprising and the riots and other issues happening across America and in this political landscape we now live in, and some of the other issues I mentioned, whether it's LGBTQ or if it's bullying or religious hatred. We felt like we can address this by raising awareness within media companies, and we reached out to and had good relationships with everything from Fox News Network to CNN, the New York Times to The Atlantic, and everything in between. And we worked with them to do big data analysis and show them, not just tell them, this is your level of bias, if you will. But we reached a point, Mark, where it was like facing a tsunami. And we decided to shift our mission from trying to change what the news is telling us in the media and Hollywood as well, to creating our own content. So that was the segue into me reaching out to Wheelhouse to form a partnership for these virtual reality immersion experiences. And as I've been in grad school and I've been focused on the applications of virtual reality and treatment for psychosis and depression and post-traumatic stress, again, I feel it's limitless what we can do. It's mostly a bandwidth issue.
Why are these issues important to you, issues regarding bias and inequality?
Well, I think I was raised in a community where My mom especially wanted us to look at the world with open eyes. So I was raised in a very homogenous community. It was all Caucasian. We were either German or Scandinavian and Protestant or Lutheran. So I really didn't have exposure to anything other than those cultures growing up. But all of my dolls were minorities, if you will. I had Chinese dolls, I had Indian dolls, I had an African American doll, and my mom tried in a different way she could to teach me empathy and appreciation for others that didn't look like me. So that has always stuck with me. It's part of why I went to the East Coast to sort of gain that exposure to diversity, if you will. And then, of course, the military is a representation of America, and the Army, anyhow, is very intentional about recruiting those who reflect our citizens in the country. So I've always been, since leaving home, in very diverse environments. I care about bias and seeing the world through others' eyes or walking a mile in someone's shoes, also because of my work in the military as an intelligence officer. And I had various roles in the intelligence community. We can talk about that. But one in particular was learning becoming a strategic debriefer, it's called. But basically, getting in someone else's shoes by getting in their mind. And to do that, you truly have to have some level of empathy to get them to talk about themselves and to relate to them, to find common ground. So maybe it's an extension of my youth. Maybe it just was my calling. I don't know. But I see what's going on in our community, and I feel I've been blessed with a network and education and experience in 80 countries around the world, in service. And if I can use all of those to try to change the conversation in America and my community and my office about meeting people where they're at and valuing people for everything they bring to the table, then I'll feel like mission fulfilled.
Well, we will talk about your military service and growing up. But first I want to ask you about a program that you're currently in at Oxford University studying global business. And you are an ambassador of the program. What was your experience? I
think I'm on a quest to constantly be learning, maybe a little bit like you. And I hope that journey never ends. So I have multiple master's degrees already, but I thought as I broaden my horizons and focus on this use of virtual reality in all of these different spheres, that it would make sense to look into a business degree. And because my passion is international relations, this was a way to merge them. So the program is called a Diploma in Global Business Development. And I proposed to Wheelhouse Media to help them take some of their technology to a global market, to emerging markets and existing developed markets. But what's happened is, as I've been exploring this use of VR, I've found partners around the world, and I can see just this emerging opportunity for anyone who cares about these issues to really make a difference and actually maybe make a living doing it as well. But the thing I love about Oxford is my classroom has 43 students from 32 different countries, and we think differently. We come from 25 different industries, so we have very different experiences to share and sharpen each other's thinking, give each other different perspectives on the world, on various issues, and it's been good to expand my horizons again. Even though Charlotte has a multicultural community, it's nice to get out of the U.S. once in a while and have inspiration. Well, the more we talk, the more you share these various interests that you have. What is driving you, Paula, in terms of pursuing what is interesting to you and constantly being curious? What's that all about? I don't know what drives me. I love my life. I love the blessings I have and the opportunities I have. And I guess I think of a poem by Lord Alfred Tennyson. It's called Ulysses. And there's a line in it. It's about traveling the world and living life to the fullest, but it ends with drinking life to the lees. And so the lees were the residue at the bottom of a glass of beer. I'm not the biggest beer drinker, but you get the point. Like, just live life to the fullest and always be giving back too, not just taking. And I think I get energy from being a connector and helping people find opportunities. I get energy from trying to make the world a better place. I think that's how my parents taught me. That's where I get my value from, is giving back. I think that's why I was drawn to military service. I think that's why I work in a nonprofit world now. So I think just the opportunity to keep serving, and part of that is exploring new opportunities and meeting new people and always questioning how can I help them be their best. and that encourages me to be my best.
Well, let's talk about this life that you've led. You grew up in Bismarck, North Dakota in the 1970s and 80s. How would you describe Bismarck?
Bismarck was a bucolic place. The population at the time I was growing up was 35,000, so not too small, but I didn't know anything else, so it felt like a big metropolitan city.
How do you think Bismarck shaped who you are?
Well, the good thing in Bismarck was it was a small pond, and so I think my parents encouraged me to be all I could be. Again, part of why I was drawn to the Army. I liked the motto, and there was an opportunity to play in every sport, to be in an orchestra, to be a student council, to serve in the state student council and the national student council. So I think, again, I got a lot of affirmation from doing positive things from my parents, and so I wanted to do more of that, maybe to please my parents, but also, even at that point, love serving. One other thing, I guess, that I think shaped me was my father has a cattle ranch, and it was about an hour from the city of Bismarck, where I grew up, but we all had to work. We all had to throw hay to the cows or pick boulders, or I would drive around in the combine with my dad sometimes just talking. I had to work probably the least. I was the little girl and the youngest, but just appreciation for the earth and how we can plant and make things that sustain us as human beings. I'll always remember that, and the hard work that goes into work worth doing, and my father loved that. So the biggest thing I think I took away from watching him and being part of that was the importance of a work ethic. Again, we all had to contribute to make that farm and the cattle ranch successful. It's the same thing here in the work environment. It's one team, one fight. That's the same in the military, too. So I guess that's a common theme in my life.
Your dad was a rancher?
He was a school teacher and a rancher. Yeah, he still is. He's very high energy. He taught me so much about being an optimist and focusing on silver lining in life and grabbing the bull by the horns, he used to say, and just, take on any mission. You can do it. So I really attribute my optimism to him. I'm grateful for that.
Is there a military legacy in your family?
There is no military legacy in my family. My mom used to talk about West Point, and I thought it was in North Dakota. But when I was applying to colleges, I got into Georgetown School of Foreign Service, had I think 100% scholarship, got into Columbia and a basketball scholarship. But the Gulf War was going on at the time, the first Gulf War. And I remember watching it and thinking my goal was to be an ambassador or a senator. And if I wanted to go into politics, I had to understand that instrument of power because it was so powerful. Do you remember the war was over in 2 or 3 days? And so I thought, well, I'll apply to the Air Force Academy because it's close. That's the biggest Ivy League, in quotes, near North Dakota. And I went through the whole process of applying, and you have to get a nomination from a congressperson. You have to have psychological tests and physical fitness tests. And at some point, the enthusiasm for joining the military kind of waned off. But I was still going down this path of applying. It was the day of our state basketball championship, and I was the team captain. And we were playing in a city about 2 hours away. We had 2 games that day, and I had to drive home in the morning for an interview with my senator and then drive back for the championship game. And I remember thinking, I need to take this more seriously. If I'm, leaving my team to go do this thing that I'm thinking I probably won't do anyhow, maybe I'll just do it to say I got in and then say no. It was a little bit arrogant. But I decided, it was very spiritual at that point, and I had time to think in my car, and I thought, maybe this is the path I'm supposed to go on. Maybe this is how I can really serve my country. And so when I got to the interview with my senator, there were a couple other kids out in the hall waiting, and as nervous as I was, probably more nervous. And he said, Paula, you've shown leadership in school, and academics are great, and athletics are great, but you never said you wanted to fly, so why should I give you my appointment to the Air Force Academy? And of course, my heart sunk because here I just talked myself into it, and then I realized I wasn't going to get it. And he said, those kids out in the hall have wanted to fly their whole life. And I said, before you can say anything, I'd like to offer you my appointment to West Point instead. And I was like, that's when I got back in the car. I asked for some time to think about it. I got back in the car, and I thought, this is the path I think I'm supposed to go on. And so I said yes. And I got to West Point eventually, and I didn't realize you had to wear a uniform 24 hours a day. You were issued socks, and every garment was, the same. Everyone looked the same. They stripped down your identity in order to mold you into the leader they wanted you to be. So it was a circuitous route to get to the military, but very glad I did it.
Paula, let's talk a bit more about family life. Brothers or sisters?
I have 2 older brothers. They're 4 and 6 years older. We definitely had a love-hate relationship growing up, but very close, especially with my oldest brother now. We've been through lots of ups and downs together, and, blood is thicker than water.
In high school, you had quite a career, and you referenced a bit of it. You were valedictorian, homecoming queen, student body president, all-state athlete, and lead violin player in the school orchestra. You were driven.
Well, those were the glory days. Thank you for a flashback to 20-some years ago. I was driven, but it was, as I said earlier, I think I saw my parents happy when I was performing, and I loved making them happy. And my school encouraged it, and my social networks did, but so many people around me were also champions. I was in a group of friends called the Wholesomes. We didn't drink, we didn't date, we were just, we went to church, we were, did the things we needed to in the school, sat on student council, and were on sports, and it just was a great place to grow up because the opportunities were limitless, and I think I had a great social group to support and to nurture me, and hopefully I was able to do the same for them.
The Wholesomes.
The Wholesomes. We were the Wholesomes.
Do you still play the violin?
I still play the violin. I do, yes. And my kids play instruments, so once in a while we'll get out even the karaoke machine and play a little bit. But honestly, even in high school, playing violin became an emotional expression for me. When I was sad for some reason, I would play a song and cry while I was playing. But I love that form of art, and just it's another language. So I'm glad I still have my violin, and hopefully I'll never give it up.
You were voted most likely to be remembered.
For better or worse. Probably, I think there were some interesting awards that year. I'm not sure what the other options were.
Paula, you mentioned West Point. When you think about West Point, your time there, what comes to mind?
It was the most formative experience you can ever imagine having in college. It shaped the person I am. It reinforced my commitment to duty, honor, country, which is the motto. And it taught me so much about selfless service, and life's not so much about performing necessarily and getting your parents to love you or your community to love you, but about serving a greater good. And that played into my faith, but also my love of my country. And really, spending time at West Point opened so many doors for me. Young girl, lived in a cattle ranch, or, kind of rancher's daughter, goes to West Point, and I become a liaison for the school to the White House and to events in D.C. And I get to go to Egypt and Israel and see what their militaries are doing. And I got to live in Germany for a while. So just broadening my horizons beyond what I ever imagined was possible. I'm so grateful for the experience and the lifelong friends I gained from there. And I thought I would never go back after those 4 years. There's a kind of fun saying about taking off the rearview mirror when you drive away. Like, I never want to see that again. But I ended up back there as a reservist, teaching in the social science department, teaching international relations and security and conflict resolution. And it was really fun to be on the other side, teaching instead of being a cadet. But it's a beautiful place. It's really magical. It's what America's about. There's so much idealism and commitment to the country. So I appreciate that experience, even as hard as it was.
You came into West Point as a high-achieving student. What did you learn about yourself at West Point? And were you ever tested in a way where you doubted your ability to get through and to achieve?
Well, in hindsight, I'd like to say, oh, it was great. It was, wonderful, formative experience. But my mom reminds me every once in a while that when we did get to speak once a week, so obviously this was before computers or internet or cell phones, and there was one phone for 120 people to use, I would get one call a week, and she said there were a few tears shed. I appreciate her sending me a letter every day, encouraging me. I would never quit, but I took a lot of support from family to get through it. So just the crucible experience, and I say that on many levels. So physically, it's demanding. I was recruited to the track and cross-country team, so I was in season all year long. We practiced in the morning and the afternoon. The academics were very intense. Everyone has to pick an engineering path, and that wasn't necessarily my strong suit or my passion, but I had to go through systems engineering track, and so had to work really hard to get those grades, and then also take the courses that I loved and to pursue the career I wanted. And even at West Point, I volunteered to lead clubs and try different after-school activities. So I think one of the biggest challenges is when you're really stripped of your identity. You can't wear jewelry. You can't decorate your room. You cannot show off any affluence. It's all based on your character. Your acceptance by your classmates and your rankings from your professors and advisors is all based on the character that you bring with you or that gets shaped there. And I love that. I love that it was an equal playing field. I wish we had more of that in America. I wish more people could experience some kind of compulsory service, whether it's volunteering for AmeriCorps or Teach for America, the military maybe. Not each of those is for everyone, for sure. But learning to serve something greater than myself and sacrifice things I liked, and even part of my identity to do that, it's challenging, but it's also rewarding. And it's exhausting. It's a tough place, but again, in hindsight, glad I did it.
Paula, in your senior year at West Point, what branch did you pursue?
I wanted to pursue the field of military intelligence. I wanted to learn about various disciplines in the intelligence field, from imagery satellites to measures and signatures collection to spy work called human intelligence to all sorts of intelligence. So how do we understand what the enemy is doing and what we ourselves are doing, and even things like the weather and the geography? How's it going to impact our operations on the ground? And I frankly thought these skills would be transferable to the private sector if I ever decided to get out. But the process for deciding and being assigned to a branch and a post is very exciting and nerve-wracking for seniors or firsties at West Point. In the spring, the school puts out a class ranking, and your individual ranking is based on your academic performance, which is 50%, and then 30% military bearing and military fitness and how you've been a leader at school, and then 20% on your athletic fitness and wellness. So, serious weighting for all of them. But they want a well-rounded officer, and you can imagine why the latter two, besides academics, are very important. So based on that class rank, students put in their preference for a branch, whether it's engineering or infantry or aviation or intelligence. And then based on your class rank as well, you choose the post you want to go to. And the folks at the end of the class, the lowest ranking, which is typically called the GOAT, they might not get their first choice of service or location. And I was fortunate to be ranked, I think, in the top 10% or top 20%. I don't even remember. But I chose intelligence, and I chose Korea for my first assignment because I thought, I want to get as far away from West Point as I can, and I want to see the real world, and I actually want to do intelligence collection, and I may never go to Asia again, so why not while I'm young and single? And I loved it. It was breathtaking and eye-opening and scary at the same time.
Paula, over the course of your career, which lasted 23 years in the U.S. Army, you served in many places. You referenced over 80 countries around the world. Is there a particular mission that tested you?
Well, I would almost say every mission I've been through prepared me for life, tested me in a way that showed me I could get through any hardship in life, and I'm grateful for that. But, some of the experiences I've had, I can't talk about because they're somewhat classified, but I think when you're actually planning an operation that involves other humans and you're responsible for their life, so part of my role was putting together an intelligence package to show our special operations task forces how to go into a certain destination. I had to get them there, which involved an airplane drop and parachutes and skiing, get them into a location, take out the enemy, and then get them safely out of there without losing anybody. That will test you every time. I mean, I get goosebumps right now talking about it because it's a lot of stress. You think about not only them, but their families. And I think we're all human at the end of the day. You actually think about the warlord we're killing too, because they may be evil, but they have a family. And so war is ugly. And you can imagine why people who do this for a living come back with post-traumatic stress and have a hard time. They feel happy they serve their country, but at the same time, there's something called moral injury. And they feel like what they did was for the right purpose and justifies the means. But it's still, at the end of the day, it's war.
Were you good at what you did?
I'm not sure I would rank myself or grade myself, but I will say I loved it. And as an officer, there's a basic pathway you go to get exposed to different disciplines within your own field. So I went on a path where first I was electronic warfare officer, intelligence officer, and we were listening to North Korean communications and jamming them, basically. After Korea, I wanted a little different living experiences. So the barracks we lived in Korea had not been rebuilt since the Korean War. It was pretty Spartan living. It was no different really from West Point. We still had to be on base at a certain time, had a curfew, had to be in our rooms. We were quite controlled. So coming from West Point, I was used to that. But in my mid-20s, I realized it would be nice to have some freedom. And so I chose Germany as my next assignment. And I went from being an electronic warfare officer to an analyst for the Middle East and Africa. And was in my early 20s and had the opportunity to represent U.S. Forces Europe and U.S. Army Europe all over Africa. And that made me very proud. There's also, it's very challenging. You have to make sure you don't create a diplomatic situation in some way. But I enjoyed that for the exposure, again, to seeing the world, just seeing the juxtaposition of what we live with here in America and what Zimbabweans are dealing with and countries at war like Democratic Republic of Congo. So I definitely grew up during that experience, but it was also exciting being part of a team and feeling like I was contributing something. So also in Europe, I served the largest military police battalion in the world, and I was the chief intelligence officer. So the police are providing security for our forces, and we at the time had military operations in the Balkans and in Greece and across the region. So making sure that there was force protection measures in place was one of my main missions, that our convoys were protected. Even if our military police were escorting fissile material across Germany or some kind of nuclear waste, not fissile material, but some kind of toxic chemical, that those route plans were clear and no civilians would be injured. But during that time, Al-Qaeda and other other terrorist organizations were building up in the Balkans and in North Africa, which were part of our region. And so I started to move my mission more to counterterrorism preparedness. And so the next job I had was specifically doing counterterrorism and piecing together the networks out there of terrorist organizations, and what their implications would be on our forces in Europe. So at the time in Germany, it wasn't only Al-Qaeda and international terrorist groups, but there were domestic terrorist organizations as well. So that really shifted my focus, and frankly, pretty much every intelligence officer, on fighting the war on terror behind the scenes that most Americans didn't even know yet. At some point, though, I had served my 5 years of active duty, and I wanted to stay in the reserves, but I also wanted to get married, and I found it difficult with my fiancé at the time. I was being deployed to Africa, and he was deployed to Croatia, and then I was in Macedonia, and he was in Africa, and we thought, how are we going to have a family? And this is a very real struggle for a lot of dual military families. It's a real challenge. So I decided to go into the reserves, and he decided to get out. And we moved back to Colorado, and then 9/11 happened, and a week later I got a phone call, and I was mobilized. They called it involuntary mobilization, but I was really happy to go serve again and to have a real mission. And I knew what was going on with terrorism around the world because that's what I'd worked on for the last 2 years. So I was recalled and sent abroad again to support Special Operations Command in Europe, and we were focused on supporting operations outside of Afghanistan. So we started the war in Afghanistan, and a lot of the warlords from Afghanistan were leaving that country and going into Georgia and the Caucasus and coming back towards Europe. So that's where I was putting together the packages, the insertion packages, if you will, how to get our special operators in to get, to terminate the objective and get them out safely. And after that, I came back to the U.S., and then we started the war in Iraq, and I was mobilized again. And this time I was sent to work for an FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, which was very educational for me, having only really worked in the military and, of course, NATO environments. Now I was amongst a team of drug enforcement agency officers of every three-letter agency you can imagine. And we had to work as one team, which doesn't always work well in the government. A lot of agencies are very territorial. A lot of agents themselves are with the information or the cases they're handling, as you can imagine. If you have a source, you want to protect the source. So it was a big learning curve for a lot of organizations involved in intelligence collection and counterterrorism in the U.S. And that was the time when the FBI really started to shift its mission from well, they have multiple missions, obviously, but counterterrorism became a primary mission for them at that point. So that was riveting. It was meaningful. We were collecting information that was helping our troops abroad and saving lives in America. And the thing you learn from this kind of work, Mark, is when you save the day, or your team saves the day, I should say, when you do good work, it doesn't make a headline. And there's so much great work and so much blood, sweat, and tears that goes into keeping America safe. And these unsung heroes are truly that, heroes. So I love that experience. It was also just educational to see how other bureaucracies work. And then, so I served my time there, and then I had children, so I decided to go into basically an inactive status with the reserves.
Paula, while you are living in Colorado on reserve, 9/11 occurs. I want to bring you back to that day, a beautiful Tuesday morning, as we know. Can you remember that morning?
I distinctly remember it, Mark. I'm sure you do as well. So my husband at the time and I had just moved to Colorado, and we were in a hotel looking for a home still. We'd only been back a week or two. And I remember sitting down and watching the TV while I was having my coffee. And the news at that point hadn't figured it out, but there was coverage of, some plane just hit the Trade Center. And I said to Scott, that's a terrorist attack. And then the second one came, and I said, and I'm going to get mobilized. And we just kind of knew that was going to happen, that I would be mobilized just given how our military works. So we started preparing as a family mentally for this could come, and it will change everything. The house we buy, the employment he had a job lined up, but we had to put our life and our thought of having kids on hold. I remember thinking there, laying that, and we actually just held each other and cried because we thought this is going to get worse before it gets better.
You had a sense that it was a terrorist attack on the first plane?
I did. I don't know if you know this, but in 1993 there was an attempted attack on the World Trade Center, and it was through a vehicle bomb. But that has long been a target, and I just we knew that terrorists were using. I guess I can't get into it too much, but using aircraft as potential lethal weapons or researching it. So I don't know, maybe it was instinct in my training, but I remember thinking immediately, that's a terrorist attack. That was not an accident.
Paula, while you were in Colorado, you began pursuing additional master's degrees. Tell me about the academic work that you did.
While I was working for the FBI in Colorado on the task force, I decided I wanted to think about a career shift, and what better place to pivot than through grad school. So the University of Colorado Corbell School has a program that focused on international relations, which was my background, but also conflict resolution. And so I started going to night school and loved it so much, loved the network of people that thought differently. I had grown up in a very conservative environment. The military is very conservative in general. And in a graduate school program, usually there are a lot of diverse thinking. And so part of what I fell in love with was people were challenging my ideas. But I could also bring something to the classroom because I had some real world experience that was different from theirs. So I loved that so much, I decided to apply for a doctorate program out on the East Coast. And so I hope I never give up my pursuit of learning, but it gets expensive at some point.
That school on the East Coast was Harvard University.
The Kennedy School, that's correct.
Yeah. What were your ambitions?
My ambition since I grew up was to serve at the highest levels of government. So in high school, it was to become a senator or an ambassador. In the military, when I thought I was going to stay in, I thought I'm going to be first female general officer. Thankfully, we have 4-star female general officers now and many more on the way, including some of my classmates from West Point. My peer group is now becoming general officers. But at that point in my career, I thought I want to bring this world experience I've had in war zones and in the White House, from executive boardrooms to classrooms in school, just very diverse experience with kings and paupers, if you will. I want to bring that to the field of national security. So I set my mind on becoming National Security Advisor. Condoleezza Rice had gone to the University of Denver, and that was the path she had pursued. And so I studied her resume, and then I studied Madeleine Albright's resume, and I thought, what are the paths they chose to get to those high levels? And it was academia. It was learning. It was learning qualitative and quantitative methods, not necessarily so they could do analysis, but so that they could run, manage teams that could really do in-depth analysis of social problems across the world, of security problems, of economic problems.
The highest level of national service is President of the United States. Did you have an ambition to be President of the United States?
No, I loved the field of intelligence so much. I never had a desire to be president. I promised. No, it's funny you would ask. I wanted to be a senator, and every once in a while I toy with the idea of politics. And a couple of years ago, I sat down with a couple of U.S. senators who wanted me to consider it, given I'm a woman, educated in the veteran background. But I think politics has gotten so ugly, and there are many ways to continue to serve and even influence politics. There's a great campaign run out of Charlotte, run by veterans, and their goal is to get more veterans elected to Congress. And I have several friends, several peers who are running for U.S. Congress this year. And I think getting behind them and helping shape their ideas is equally as powerful as being in the spotlight, sometimes more powerful.
Where is the burning ambition now?
Where do I focus it? Or it's alive.
So that lifelong burning ambition to serve at a high level does not go away. It's still with you. Where do your thoughts go now with that ambition?
Well, I've learned to focus my ambition in different directions. Number one is on raising my children, being the best mom I can be, and that will always be number one to me. Number two, I don't think you have to necessarily serve your country in a government role to serve your country. And I try to serve through my active participation in nonprofit boards here in the community by raising awareness of various issues from heart disease to human trafficking initiatives in Charlotte. But my professional goal, once I finish this graduate school program at Oxford, and once we complete some of the missions we have here at Wheelhouse, is to really educate the world on the use of virtual reality as this new medium for all of the things I mentioned earlier, for psychosis treatment, depression treatment, PTS treatment. We have a chronic mental health crisis in the United States. There are 300,000 children in North Carolina alone who have mental health issues, and we don't have the providers to take care of them. And this alternate experimental psychology, if you will, has proven itself effective. So how do you convince people who are scared of technology or of just something unfamiliar how effective it can be? So I want to kind of champion that in our community. No other production company is doing that in the Carolinas. It's a kind of nascent concept around the U.S., but the return on investment is huge, whether it's for mental health treatment or for physician training, even for new educational tools in museums and in schools. So I would love to position myself as a champion for this kind of new innovation in technology and how it can make the world a better place, truly, whether it's the immersion experience and you change your mind about somebody who doesn't look like you, or you now know how to do CPR or respond to a cardiac arrest situation, or you now have reduced anxiety when you go grocery shopping, or if you had fear of heights, your life has changed. It's really powerful. It's a different way to serve by bringing this tool to the world.
Paula, you've shared this passion around VR technology and what's possible and its potential uses. You have a background and an experience and a passion that lends itself to being the CEO of an enterprise. What might be in your future?
Well, it's funny you mention that because I think I've gone through life thinking I'm feeling like a leader. That's what the military trained you to take ownership of that leadership role. But I think for a lot of women, and maybe I'm speaking for myself, the thought of being a CEO is daunting. What if I fail? Then will that reflect on all other women in this industry? But Mark, I've adopted a new mantra, and it's fail faster and just try. And if you fail, try again and just keep trying. And that's how all of this came about. We've really realized there's great traction with the use of VR technology for all these different fields. And so let's be leaders. Let's take risks. We're having to spend money to make money, hopefully, eventually, but it's not about the money. It's about let's change the world. Let's make the world a better place. So I am always open-minded. I've also learned to be flexible, and if there's another path that the universe sets out for me, then I'll go down that path. I just don't sweat the small stuff anymore. As my mom said, if money can fix it, everything will be okay. So I stay focused on what's important, and that's, are my kids okay? Okay, then it's okay if I fail again professionally. I'm proud of that. I'll own it and say, here's what I learned from it.
Well, let's conclude on that note. What is important to you, Paula?
Well, I think family and friends are so important. I think I wouldn't be anywhere without people who've encouraged me along the way. And I think about my experience in Charlotte. I moved here 10 years ago and didn't really know anybody. But this group of strong, committed, can-do women came into my horizon, and I came into theirs. And we just, without even explicitly saying it, we started helping each other. We promote each other. We elevate each other's initiatives. We sing about each other, and we work collectively to make our community stronger and better. And I feel like that's the values I live. But to find a community that does that on an even higher level is so inspirational to me, and it's so empowering. And I think we can do so much more together. So I'm so grateful for my social network, my professional network, the family here in Charlotte. I really care about initiatives in supporting our community, and I love working with them to get the job done.
Thanks so much for your time today, Paula.
Thank you, Mark.
Paula Kranz is Interim Executive Director of Wheelhouse Media Foundation and Director of the Think Broader Foundation. She is a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. She holds a master's degree in international security from the University of Denver and a master's degree in international relations and national security from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. And now, a personal word. Paula Kranz is known to most of the world as Paula Broadwell. I read an interview that Paula gave that was published in Vanity Fair magazine in December 2016. The interview begins with Paula noting that what she has accomplished in her career is not discussed in news articles. Her nonprofit work, service to her country, her academic rigor, her courage interviewing terrorists, her military intelligence work in refugee camps and third world prisons. That was the conversation I wanted to have for this podcast. I wanted to talk with Paula on her terms, about her life and achievements, about what she is working on and her ambitions going forward, about the core values that guide her. I reached out to Paula 3 times before this conversation occurred. The first time was in September 2017, shortly after the launch of the podcast. Paula said she was open to being a guest, but asked for an outline of my questions. I had seen her on cable news months earlier talk about national security issues. I sent her the broad topic areas I wanted to explore: her thoughts on the current national security posture, the strengths and weaknesses of our intelligence gathering and analysis, what she learned in the last 10 years, what book she would write today. She declined that conversation. Over the following months, I would see social media posts of her new ventures. In the spring of 2018, I sent her a note without receiving a response. She was redefining who she was in public. It is something creative and adventurous people do. Paula had begun to focus on providing education, training, and content development to advocate for individuals and groups who face systematic social and media discrimination. Her work turned to virtual reality simulations. In November 2018, I saw that Paula was a contributor to the Vicarious art exhibit about soldiering and the veteran experience at the Elder Gallery of Contemporary Art. I attended a luncheon at the gallery where Paula presented. She and I sat at the same table and we talked over lunch. It was the first time we spoke at length in person. We then talked on the phone about what a recorded conversation might explore. Shortly before Veterans Day, we recorded our conversation at Wheelhouse Media Studio. Afterward, Paula had me put on an Oculus Go headset to see a virtual reality recording of the Charlotte Opera. I think about the poem Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson. It is the poem Paula quoted. The poem is a dramatic monologue in the voice of Ulysses, reflecting on his many adventures. Ulysses talks about living life to the fullest. His spirit yearns for new experiences. He wishes to follow knowledge like a sinking star and forever grow in wisdom and learning. Here are verses from the poem. I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. All times I've enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly, both with those that loved me and alone. I am become a name for always roaming with a hungry heart. Much have I seen and known, cities of men and manners, climates, councils, governments, myself not least, but honored of them all, and drunk delight of battle with my peers, far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. I am a part of all that I have met. Though much is taken, much abides, and though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. This is Mark Paris, and you've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Additional support for this podcast is provided by the UNC College of Arts and Architecture, celebrating a decade of creative education in the arts and design. Thank you to our funding partners, and to my teammates, Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, Art and Media Director. This is how you can help. Please write a review on iTunes. It helps us grow our audience. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And become a patron. We are on Patreon, a crowdsourcing platform that allows you to support what you value at a level you choose. Visit us also on our website on lifeandmeaning.com. Thank you for listening.